Hello, everyone. This is the RF Factor podcast, episode number 14, with Pete Gagliardi and me, Ray Gadetti. Hey, folks, tonight we are joined by David Cooper, a former SEAL Team 6 commander, Master Chief. He's the founder of Verge, a boutique coaching and consulting company where that mission that he's advancing is the blending of his military experience with lessons learned about complex systems. And in the green room, we sort of talked a little bit about that. So I'm looking forward to teasing that out a little bit more. 25 years in the U.S. Navy, the majority of that with the Navy SEALs, decorated, distinguished. What's incredible is 1 silver star, 6 bronze stars. That's pretty impressive. But I think if you ask him, his greatest accomplishments are being a devoted husband and a father. So let's bring him on. And actually, wait, I forgot to say hello to you, Pete. Pete, how are you, sir?
Yeah, how you doing, Ray? Hey, look, this David's the real deal, man. This guy is a true hero, a true American patriot. This is going to be a great one today. So look, you think we better remind everybody about what we're about here at the RF Factor, or you think they all know it by now?
I like when you remind us because I need a constant reminder. So I've been told by a lot of people to include yourself. So go for it.
Well, the RF Factor stands for relentless follow-up. It's the key factor when anyone's trying to implement a new policy or program within an organization. It's often the most difficult one to sustain. You know, it involves looking back constantly, like you check your rearview mirror when you're driving on the highway, see what's behind you, see what you left behind. Are the programs and the policies that you put in place 6 months ago, a year ago, 5 years ago, are they still standing? Are they still functioning as intended? Most importantly, are they producing the type of performance that you anticipated? So what we try to do every day in the RF Factor here is to ferret out the key leadership principles from our guests. As you know, we only bring guests on who have been proven leaders in their respective organizations. And it's those experiences that we want to tease out so that we can look at how we might want to positively impact change, learning from them. Change for the better, not change for the sake of doing change.
Well said, my friend. Well said. So without further ado, let's bring on Mr. David Cooper. Hello, sir. Good evening. Good evening.
Howdy. He's got Excalibur there in the background. You see it?
Yeah, glowing, it seems, too. Right?
That's the first thing that I saw. And, knowing his background, I think he probably actually pulled it out of a rock.
Right out of the stone.
Somebody else did and gave it to me. That's the truth, right?
Wow.
I just hang it in my office.
Wow. Hey, so thanks for coming on. Yeah. I know we have a mutual friend, James Sheehan.
Yes, we do.
From when Pete and I started this, he just kept nagging me. You got to get this guy on. You got to get this guy on. I said, he's not going to talk to us. No, I'm telling you, you got to get this guy on. He's phenomenal. So I appreciate it. I don't know if Jimmy paid you to come on, but we're so glad that you did. Very interested in your story. In particular, what we were started off talking in the green room about sort of like the natural order of things and looking even in your bio, this notion of, blending your military experience with the complex systems. So maybe we could just start off right there.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, SEALs work in complex environments, and that was evident to me from the time I joined the Navy out of college. I was a budding molecular biologist.
Yeah, that's. I don't understand how you go from a budding molecular biologist to a Navy SEAL.
And
But
that's a jump, huh? That's a big jump.
Quite the jump. Yeah, I was always I was always, a decent athlete, a good student. And my junior year in college, everybody else is trying to decide what they're going to do. They're going to go to med school, or they're going to go to graduate school. I used to smile and nod whenever those after college life conversations came up. But in the back of my mind, there was that alarm bell going off, kind of screaming, "Run!" I wanted to. All I'd ever known of the world was Eastern Pennsylvania, and I wanted to see if I couldn't combine those, the kind of mental world, the intellectual world with the physical world. And I had no idea where I would do that, how that would be. Um, I figured it would just emerge an answer out of the clouds. And lo and behold, I took a history course in elective my junior year. It was the history of the Vietnam War, and the professor, he's racing through the war. He just mentioned the date, January 8th, 1962, and that was the day Kennedy signed into existence the United States Navy SEALs. And I paused right there, and I thought, what the heck is a Navy SEAL? I'd never heard of one. It's 1987. Right. We didn't have a plethora of book writers back then coming from the SEAL teams, and what little information I could find out was intriguing. It was a bunch of guys working in small teams all over the world, jumping out of airplanes at 20-some thousand feet, climbing mountains, braving the North Sea like Vikings. And as soon as I, read that, I thought, hey, here's a group of guys that are trying to, suck the marrow out of life. They were going for it,
I love it.
Yeah. And I wanted to do that too. And my intention was just a couple of years. I get the wanderlust out of my system. I told my buddies, hey, after we graduate, I go off, I do this thing for a little while. Then I come back, I grow up, I go on to graduate school or med school, whatever the case might be. And I said that in 1987, a couple of years turned into 15 years. 2001 was really the first time I kind of came up to take a breath, no pun intended, or maybe the pun is intended, Navy SEAL. And at that point, I concluded that I'd accomplished everything I'd set out to do, and then some. I've been around the world a couple times. I learned a lot about myself and the world. Not all of it good, as you can imagine. I'd met the woman who was to become my wife, so she was, she was eager for me to grow up. I think she still is. And then, so the plan was I was going to go to med school in the Navy's dime, and then, we all know what happened at the end of the summer, right? The towers went down, and really for me and my teammates, there was no looking back. And then we spent the next decade plus in one war zone or another. Wow. I finally retired at the end of 2012. And at that point, I was like, itching to get back into school. I didn't know what that would look like, but I wound up at Oxford, going back and forth between Oxford and HEC Paris. And this notion of complexity intrigued me. And what is a complex system, or a complex adaptive system? We can go everywhere from the planets to the climate to your brain, your body, organizations, teams. They're all complex systems. How do they change, adapt, learn, and grow? How do you kind of mold and shape these things? And there's a lot of deep science involved in that, but there's also a lot of social psychology and stuff like that. And as I said, it intrigued me. I started running down that road in 2016, and I have been on it ever since. And it's really about, how do you take, let's just say, a team? What makes a team tick, or what makes a team not tick so well? What are the conditions? How do we set them? And again, how can we, manage some of these things? Control's not a really good word with human beings, but how do we manage some of these complexities and steer that team in the direction we want to go? As SEALs, we tended to do that pretty well. We had an environment that forced us to learn, forced us to be adaptive. Frankly, if you didn't, you ran the risk of dying. So, and forced us to listen to each other. And really, I would say one of our secrets there was forced us to harness the D word, diversity. And, people say, well, I don't see much diversity in a group of guys, right? But there's a great deal of diversity in in 8 SEALs. We have different strengths, different skills that we bring to the table. Everybody has some shared skills, but there are guys who specialize: snipers, breachers, climbers, the sky gods who are your parachute experts and stuff like that. So we bring all these functional skills together. We come from different cultures. We have different types of education and different educational backgrounds. And we see the world a little bit differently, that kind of cognitive diversity. And we tend to combine those things. We embrace the kind of conflict that comes with it. There is a great deal of conflict that comes with that kind of diversity, but we embrace both the diversity and the conflict, and we come up with some pretty novel solutions to some tough problems, be they the bin Ladens of the world or Captain Phillips, Jessica Buchanan hostage
Right.
rescue missions and stuff like that. So, but yeah, the two kind of go together hand in hand. So it was easy to take those experiences and the stories that go with that, and then kind of combine that with some of the science of complex systems and help people, change and learn and grow.
And is that what you're doing with Verge now, right? You're actually taking those stories and going out and educating people?
Yeah, I'd say I function at, half the time as a coach, and I like that. You get to develop some relationships. I don't really, as a coach, I don't provide answers. It's facilitating groups or teams to come up with the answers themselves, to experiment, to learn from those experiments, the feedback, kind of like your relentless follow-up. It's relentless feedback and not being afraid of that feedback and learning from it. And then the other half of the time as a consultant, where I will go in and do, what consultants do. I give a bunch of knowledge, I drop the mic, and I walk away. So I much prefer the coaching relationships. As I say all the time, I get to meet new and interesting people, and I don't have to put them in a detention facility or worse. So.
So David, on keeping with this coach a theme here, I noticed in your resume that you had been known throughout your command as setting the tone for the command, and that you talked about your active involvement in the professional and personal development of the officers and enlisted men. You talked about different subjects that diverse subjects that you would touch upon, such as leadership, creating high performing teams, ethics, special operations, tactics, techniques. But were there any common denominators that you saw in coaching the diverse groups of people that you said, every time I sit down and I'm coaching somebody, this is always an area, a base that I have to tag?
That's a great question. I would say first, I did those things because I learned those things. If you're going to, we don't see leadership as taking charge so much as we see it as taking part. And I think that's a big piece of what leadership means inside of the SEAL team. So it's very much a shared activity or a shared behavior. But I will tell you that, if you want to draw some distinctions, my favorite coachees, if you will, were those who kind of had their focus on the shared mission. Not kind of, but had their focus on the shared mission. They weren't interested in status. They weren't interested in their rank. They weren't interested in anything like that. And you can tell when you get with guys like that, and there's a plethora of them in the SEAL teams, that this was going to be an interesting endeavor. It was going to be fun because all they wanted to do was solve the problem, whatever that problem was, and not worry about their rank or anything else. There were certainly, just like you would see in any other kind of organization that's hierarchical like that, there were people who tended to focus on themselves, on their status. They were ultimately became bureaucrats. I suppose there's a need for them. I'm not convinced, but I really liked working with the guys who were focused on the mission, and not just the guys. We say the development group. Everybody else calls it SEAL Team 6, but there's a couple thousand people there that support the operational SEALs. Only a couple hundred of those guys, so it's everybody kind of coming together to solve some of these problems and to put us in a position of advantage. And it's cool when people are focused on the mission. I love seeing that. Yeah.
So, how does someone that once worked as a busboy at a Pennsylvania Dutch restaurant, how does that person at that point in their life, do they even know they want to go into something that's much more complex? In other words, what I'm trying to say is, how does that all happen? How do you go from a busboy at a restaurant to where you're at today?
Wow, you're talking about emergence, right? We don't know what that path is. None of us do, right? We can't. You know this. Everybody knows this. If the three of us could predict the future, we would be sitting on Wall Street right now, not in front of our screens. And even on Wall Street, they can't predict the future. Um, Ultimately, doors open, right? As you interact with people, doors open, and you decide whether you're going to walk through that door or not. And for me, a lot of these different doors opened, and I just went walking through them. I still do that to this day. If a door opens, I walk through it. In my past life as a SEAL, well, I ran through the door with a gun in my hands. If the feedback was good, I continued on. If the feedback was a wall of bullets, I turned around and went the other way, kind of thing. But yeah, none of those things are explicable in the moment. As we turn around and look back, some of the patterns might be available to us, or we might see them there. But at the time, I had nobody in my family was associated with the military. Not since World War II. My grandpa, or I had some guys on my grandfather's side. They died before I was a busboy at a Pennsylvania Dutch restaurant, so I didn't really know. I knew the stories, but we weren't military folks. My parents were raging flower children. If anything, they were anti-military, and they weren't too impressed. You know, when I enlisted in the military after college, it wasn't until about a year or two later that my dad finally said, "Okay, I think this is pretty cool." But as I said, yeah, no way you can necessarily know that. You walk through the doors, and you keep going if you like it, and if you don't, you turn around. You know, athletics, as I said, that combination of being a good student and a good athlete kind of gave me a hankering. A little bit of philosophy thrown in there from a roommate in college, who said, with particularly Eastern philosophies, that melding of the physical and the mental. Yeah, some of that was at play. It was intriguing to me, but again, the doors opened. I walked through them, and I just continued down that path.
It sounds like, and using another analogy here, your azimuth was always pointing to true north, right? And some folks, the opportunities might be there, but they go off trail there. They don't know how to follow their compass, and they don't know how to make those kind of decisions. Can you speak to that? Like, throughout when these doors were opening, when the lights were turning green, how did you know to go? Where other folks they hesitate, and they don't take the risk. They don't move outside their comfort zone, and because of such, they never grow.
Right. Some of that's genetic. If you're talking about individuals, some of that is learned as groups. I kind of grew up in a household where, uh, I was a blue collar kid, grew up on a kind of a small farm. We lived on my aunt's bigger farm, but we owned a portion of it, right? We had horses and stuff like that. And the work was hard at times. Wrestling practice was always hard. The SEALs tend to recruit wrestlers and water polo players and stuff like that. So you get used to getting beat up. There's a great deal of, humility that comes from that. Um, and in the end, I would say some of the most successful SEALs I know were unafraid of failing, right? We know it's going to happen. We don't want to be cavalier about it. That happens. We see that in individuals who can, take a hit and get back up and keep on coming again. We call that resilience, or they can reinvent themselves. Change is part of that reinvention process. But ultimately, they're not afraid of failure. There's a mindset there that it's not surprise or failure that they kind of prepare for. That they kind of know that's going to happen anyway, and they're ready for it, and they kind of welcome it. And I would say it's SEALs do that in general pretty well. We accept the fact that we're not always going to succeed. We will experiment, experiment, experiment. We will learn from that feedback that we get. Most of those experiments we would like to do in kind of safe training environment, but we learn from those things. We don't beat each other up when we make mistakes. We support each other. So, I would say a number of those attributes, if you will, were kind of resident in my early life as well. I was not necessarily afraid of failing. As I said, as a wrestler, I'd gotten my ass kicked all over the East Coast. So it was no different when I went into the SEAL teams, and really no different as we progressed as SEALs. This ability to learn from feedback, to recognize that we're not always going to be successful, but the learning is the chief outcome that we're looking for. The failure, yeah, it's going to happen, but can we learn from it, and can we keep going? As you get into SEAL teams, though, even through BUDS or SEAL training, that's difficult to do. And I would suggest, I don't suggest, I know this, that it's hard to make it through if you're on your own. There's always going to be those moments where you think, okay, I've bitten off more than I can chew. This isn't really worth it. This isn't what I want to do. But when you are, you with a core group of guys and you establish these really strong relationships, at that moment, your weakest is when those guys are lifting you up. And again, that practice continues in the SEAL teams as well. So there's a lot of, none of this stuff do we do on our own. And that's why, as I said, leadership is very much a shared responsibility inside of an operational SEAL team. That support that you get from your teammates is what keeps you going. And ultimately, when you talk about courage and stuff like that, it's not necessarily something that comes from within inside. That's part of it, but it's also something we draw from our teammates, and when you have those feelings, and those are completely normal, that, hey, this is too much and I want to turn around and go the other way, that's when there's a hand on your shoulder saying, hey, you can do this. And I was fortunate enough, you have to, and not all of it is, hey, we're not Supermen, but a lot of it is it's the good fortune of having a good group of people around you to lift you up and help you, and sometimes take you through that door if you need it. If that makes sense.
Sure
Well,
does.
so when you were sitting in that cold surf there in Coronado, you were probably sucking in more seawater than bone marrow, right? The marrow of life.
Yeah.
And you probably said, what the heck am I doing here?
Yeah, I would say, at least there was one time, as I recollect, probably more than that, but there was one time when I thought, hey, this is I'm going to get rolled back. I thought my foot was broken, and my roommate at the time said, hey, you can do this. And we only had another 24 or 36 hours to go in Hell Week, and and it was that support, this a guy saying, hey, you can do this, that helped get me over that hump and keep going.
Back something else I read that you wrote, and it was back to your experience as a busboy. And I pick on that because I think it when we think of Navy SEALs, we think of the epitome. We think of something that most people can't ever reach. But when we think about a busboy, we think just about everybody that wants to can reach that level, right? But what you said about that was something very unique, I thought. You said that it seemed menial, but you had to make it fun. But most importantly, you said you had to lend it meaning, right? And I think that that's profound in the sense that when with COVID, and we looked at the people that got us all through COVID, they weren't Navy SEALs. They were people that worked in grocery stores, in restaurants, food delivery services.
Yeah.
And I think that we learned a lesson that that's what lent meaning to those jobs.
You do. I think it's, the notion of meaning is fascinating. There's a lady out there by the name of Katie Bailey. She's at King's College in London, does a lot of research on this. It's fascinating, some of her findings. But without even digging into the research, we kind of intuitively understand that if you're not finding meaning, or if you're not finding purpose, or you can't lend that to what you're doing, it's just gonna, instead of sucking the marrow out of life, life's gonna suck the marrow out of you. Obviously, that turns into burnout and a whole host of things that people suffer from, depression and worse. But yeah, I think that was something early on that, again, I grew up with that, with a family that was always talking about meaning and deriving meaning from things. And, there's notions of gratitude and stuff like that in there. And some of the best times I had, and some of the most raucous kind of laughter I had were in some of our darkest moments. We were ready to, at one point, this is during the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, we were ready to crash in a helicopter, right? The helicopter was going down. it was it. That was the end, right? And one of the guys said it was complete silence, other than the one engine that was still working on the helicopter as we were plummeting to our death. One of the guys said, "At least we're not going to have to clean our weapons tonight." Nobody likes cleaning their weapons. We were going to be dead, so we're going to have to clean them anyway. And everybody just broke out laughing. Good fortune, pilot just came from an emergency water landing rescue school where he was an instructor, and he put that helicopter down and didn't let it flip over and all that stuff. And we were saved and we're alive. But there's always an opportunity to find meaning. Again, to go back to Katie Bailey, some of the work she has done, she's discovered that some of those people out there, janitors in New York City, where you would think, wow, that's kind of a dead end, meaningless job. Those are guys that tend to derive and girls that tend to derive some of the most meaning from their jobs. Why? Because they see the effects they have on people. They are able to look ahead and say, you know what, we're keeping this city as clean as we possibly can for people to enjoy it. And from that, they derive a great deal of meaning, and as well they should. And I think that's your answer right there.
And I thought that was profound. That statement that you made about that.
Hey, Dave, can I ask you about small teams, or just teams in general? You sort of touched on it before. Every organization has it, right? You have folks that collaboration seems easy, and other folks it's a little bit more difficult. What I found is, in my own experiences, and in particular with sharing information, but I think you can relate that to small teams. I once said, after I said it, I was like shocked that I did. I said that collaboration needs to be compelled on the front end, because I felt that it just didn't come natural. It wasn't intuitive to folks. But once they realize the benefit, the collaboration, and to your point that there's going to be someone next to you that whether they're going to help you in terms of, in your case, building you up, maybe even being a crutch physically when you thought you broke your foot, but also help you in terms of leveraging each other's information. I still stand by that at first, because I don't think collaboration is taught. But I believe once it is, then people recognize the value of it, and it becomes that much easier. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a great insight. I think we in the complex systems world would refer to that as an initial condition, right? Let's say you're new to a team and you're a little bit hesitant to speak up. Well, it's incumbent, and here's where not just formal leadership, but influential informal leaders kind of set the tone. This is this tone setting thing where they will quickly be seen talking about their vulnerabilities, talking about the mistakes that they made, making fun of themselves, being humble, right? Even though they are very skilled people. And when you start to see that, then you start to say, hey, this is a place where I can take a risk. And this is a place where I can voice my opinion. And this is a place where I can give ideas. And this is a place where I can act with other people. And I'm not going to be judged if I don't live up to my own expectations of perfection and stuff like that. And over time, that new person gets socialized into this culture, as you say, that where that cooperation in particular was kind of resident there before this person showed up. And as this is one of the things I learned in the SEAL teams. It's a tradition that I carried on. That the guys that I looked up to were just like the people I described there, very skilled, yet at the same time incredibly humble, not afraid about talking about their mistakes, their shortcomings, their concerns, and all of that stuff. And that sets a tone that's, again, suggests to particularly the new people coming in that, hey, it's actually okay here to cooperate. And when we're successful, again, where you have groups of people that are not focused on rank or social status and stuff like that, and the success is shared, ownership is shared, failure is shared, then you're going to find that this kind of pattern of cooperation becomes a positive feedback loop. More cooperation leads to more cooperation, leads to more cooperation. Then cool things can happen. Unfortunately, it's not hard to shut that down, right? And we know that if you are in a team where, let's just say relationships aren't based on things like mutual respect, right? Inside of hierarchical organizations, the military does this all the time. SEAL teams are a little bit removed from that, particularly Dev Group. Where it's the respect isn't mutual. It's supposed to be given to the person above you or several layers above you. But inside of those good teams, that respect is mutual. The active showing of care and concern is mutual, right? Inside of those kinds of organizations, that's where you're going to see this kind of positive feedback loop where cooperation equals more cooperation equals more cooperation equals cool things. And as I said, though, again, it's one toxic person in the mix. Easy to shut this stuff down, and it's hard to get it going again, but not impossible. It takes all this stuff takes energy, and a lot of times we revert again to complex systems world. All complex systems revert to their lowest energy state, right? For humans, a lot of times that's complacency or it's the status quo. I'm just gonna, come in. I don't want the ship to be rocked. I don't want anything to move. I don't like change. I like stability. And we all like stability, but we don't recognize in that inside of that stability, sometimes we're caught in a rut, right? The status quo rut or the complacency rut. And we need a little bit of shaking up to get out of that. But it takes energy to stay, if we think of that as a bowl, and here we are, this pebble down here at the bottom of the bowl. If you want to be up here where things really happen, takes a lot of energy coming from everybody. That's commitment. And we can do all kinds of things to rob people of that commitment. We can take advantage of them. We can, override their better judgment. We can, it's has happened to nurses and doctors during the COVID thing. Particularly at my wife's hospital, they didn't have enough N95 masks. So they're asking people to go into COVID positive rooms with just a surgical mask. They had no idea what was going to happen, but that's tough on people. And if you're in a constant environment like that, again, that takes the energy out of the system and you go down to this bottom here of complacency and status quo. So SEAL teams were very good at keeping your energy level up there. You got a great return on that investment. If you invested energy, that energy was going to come right back to you, and good teams turn that energy into performance. And I think a SEAL team was just good at doing that. You got a slap on the back every time. It wasn't every 6 months that you said, somebody sat you down for some kind of performance review, right? You did something good. People were patting you on the back immediately for that. By the same token, if you did something that was a little bit, not so good, you got that feedback as well. Again, that relentless feedback. So again, a lot of energy up there, high meaning, high purpose teams, and that helps that coordination piece. It's key. I mean, it's vital.
I completely get now this notion of setting the tone, and what it sounds like, it takes more than one person to set the tone. It requires constant contribution by all teammates to keep that tone set where it's at.
It really does. And you talk about, every team has not necessarily toxic people, but sometimes there'll be a freeloader inside a team. Team's doing well, and you got one person that says, "Well, basically, I can kick back here and coast." Quite often, if you don't give that person the feedback, right, you're going to keep seeing that behavior over and over and over again, and that leads to this kind of negative spiral, or can lead to that kind of negative spiral. Here's where that feedback piece comes in, because I said quite often that person who is kind of kicking back and fall into that lowest energy state is completely unaware of it. So if you just put up, as what happened to us in the SEAL team, somebody comes up and puts a hand on your shoulder or an arm around you and says, "Hey, brother, what's up?" That kind of feedback wakes you up to the fact that, hey, you might have been coasting for a little while. And if you don't get after those things, as I said, you see that behavior over and over and over again. And what does that ultimately do? Robs that team of energy, decreases that level of coordination and cooperation and all those cool things that go on inside of a team, or can anyway, right? So it takes that team. It doesn't take necessarily the formal leader being the guy to put his hand around your shoulder. It's teammates. We look at that as co-creation. It's not one person again taking charge. It's a bunch of guys coming together, in each of us, of taking ownership of that problem, even if that problem is the relationships that are so important inside that team. So, key.
Since we're on the subject of sensitivities here, can you talk about what you consider your biggest failure?
Oof. Well,
And
other, getting a teammate shot is a pretty big failure. I will, I did that. I bowed to rank early in the war in Afghanistan. Did something that I knew was foolish, and a teammate. I, I didn't get shot. That's how it happens, right? I make the mistake, somebody else gets shot. Again, that's why those relationships are so important. But I bowed to rank and got a teammate shot. Thankfully, it was through his calf, and he was fine, and he lived. Um, but still, that's when you make a mistake and that mistake doesn't affect you, it affects your teammate. Um, it, that's a big failure, and that's something I definitely learned from. I can tell you, I was not keen on bowing to rank after that. Never was. When in the culture code, I make a joke of it. The book, The Culture Code, right? As I got more senior, people wanted to call me by my rank, and I said, "Hey, my name is Dave. My name is Cooper. My name is expletive face. You can call me either one, but don't call me by my rank." Um, so that we learn from those failures. Hopefully the failures aren't so tragic that you can't overcome them. In that case, it was not, but that's a big failure. But there are other things, things that you have a great idea as a formal leader inside of an organization, and then the very next thing to do is you force it on everybody else. In hindsight, that's we tried to um, love Marines. We tried to force Marines into the assault squadrons at Dev Group, and that just was not something that the SEALs were the operators were going to take. They were never consulted. We tried to force it on them, and they resisted it as well. They should. Um, and you learn from that. And we should have said, hey, that came about because the Marines were standing up MARSOC, their own Special Operations Command. We had Marines at Dev Group, lots of them supporting us. There was the concern that the MARSOC was going to take those Marines away. How do we keep the Marines there? We said to MARSOC, well, how about we bring some of your operators over here? We'll put them through our selection course. If they make it through, they join an assault squadron for a couple of years. Delta Force had done this. It sounds like a great idea until you try and force it on people, and then it fails. And any number of times we forget that active participation is key in getting people to accept change. And when you force things on people, whatever the case might be, whether you're forcing Marines, I tried to force guys at one time to do the morning fight clubs. Guys like me love the fight club, go down jujitsu, Muay Thai, all that stuff. Well, not everybody's into that. And if you force that on them, they're simply going to dig in their heels and not buy into it. So there's a number of times I did stuff like that. And I can use those stories today to say to people, hey, here's what happened to me when I tried to force change. Are you trying to force change? And how can we go about inviting people into it? And that might not get you over the hurdle to success, but it's going to get you a lot farther down the road of being successful. So yeah, I got lots of failures. Bring my wife on the show; she'll tell you about a lot more, I suppose. But
And look, I think what you're touching on too is there seems to be a confusion. I shouldn't say seems to be. I think there's a habit of folks to confuse rank with leadership,
yeah,
and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
it's not. Bottom line, it isn't. It has almost nothing to do. Formal authority is a function of leadership. It's a tiny little aspect of it. But if that's all you have to rely on, I can tell you that you are not a leader in my book or anybody else's book either. Inside of an operational SEAL team, it's a deference to expertise, knowledge, skill, and experience. And we would also defer to character as well, right? Those guys who are, have all the knowledge, skill, and experience, but are also humble about it. I think that's key. But that notion of rank, the Bin Laden raid, it was the senior military commander forced those helicopters on us, right? Even when I said, hey, with all due respect, I wouldn't use these helicopters. He wanted me fired for voicing my opinion. That just never happens inside of an operational SEAL team. The youngest guy, if he has a concern, we would expect him to voice his opinion and his concerns. And so guys who have that formal rank, when they're successful, like to say, hey, that was because of me. But when they fail, man, they're quick to point the finger elsewhere. And we saw that happen any number of times inside of any government organization, with few exceptions. There is remember when I said there's those guys that focus on the shared task, and there's guys who focus on their individual careers and stuff like that. A primacy of the individual, as I refer to it today. There's a good bit of that inside of formal hierarchies, or what we call dominance hierarchies, that are exploitation and status oriented. And it's all about, I outrank you, therefore I'm right. I actually had in my career as a young SEAL at SEAL Team 2, I had my executive officer say to me, "Hey, I'm an O4 and you're an E5, therefore I'm right and you're wrong."
Wow.
If you gotta say stuff like that, man, that's weak, and if I ever said anything like that in a SEAL team, I would expect the guys to come up to me. I never did, but I would expect the guys to come up to me and say, "Hey, that's not who we are, man. What's up?" There's the arm around your shoulder, and you're going to get a quiet talking to. Uh, anyway, rank is not leadership, and we shouldn't confuse it as such. Unfortunately, we do, because it's associated with status.
Yeah, true.
Yep.
Pete. Oh,
Pete's out.
No,
There
I
he
am.
Yeah.
I was on mute, and then I tried to get off mute, and I shut my camera off. But, so I think you're the first person I ever met who listed anything by Thoreau as one of their most favorite books. I've got to admit, when I was in college,
Yeah.
I was a Thoreauvian, right? And I could never understand how come my English teacher would give me a bad grade for run-on sentences when that's all Thoreau could write a whole paragraph and it would be one single sentence.
I
Well,
like
that's
him.
like it, right? You can't start a
Right.
sentence with it, but when Hemingway does it, it's art, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah.
And right. But Thoreau, you go like 10 lines before you find the period.
Exactly.
Right? So tell me why you listed Thoreau as one of your favorite business books.
I think for obvious reasons. Here's a guy that writes about so many things that struck a young man and me at the time when I read Thoreau, and I've been, I keep that little tiny handbook close by at all times, right? It just strikes you as this is real, man, and he's on to something here, and I'd like to experience some of these things as well. Might not be willing to live in a cabin on Walden there for a couple years, but there's still adventure out there, and it's ultimately I saw Thoreau as wildly adventurous, and I again gets back to something Ray said. You have some people that they're apprehensive about pursuing that adventure and walking through those doors, whereas I was eager to go do that, and his writing struck a chord, and it won't with everybody. Fine, pick it up, read a couple pages. If you like it, keep reading, and that's what I did. Yeah.
The simple life, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and sitting here listening to you, Dave, it's hard not to get the impression of the warrior scholar, and I think you're the epitome of that.
I am the epitome of nothing.
But and I bring that up because
Yeah.
I think we need more of that. And now more than ever, we see that those folks are percolating. But how do
Yeah.
we create more of those warrior scholars, and not just in the military, but certainly in law enforcement and other public safety positions as well?
That is a great question, and creating them might be a bridge too far, but you set the conditions where um, those people emerge, right? And whatever that looks like, inside of the SEAL teams. Again, this is the rich get richer, poor get poorer kind of scenario. But at Dev Group, at Delta Force, we have all the money in the world to go do some of the, to entertain any notion you might have. I loved climbing. I went all over the world climbing. I loved the mixed martial arts. I went all over the world training with some of the best martial artists in the world. I left Jorge and Gracie in 2000 after training with him for a number of weeks, and left his place. And I said, you're the nicest man I've ever met that can kick my ass. And he said, he said, the lion can be friends with all the animals in the jungle, And I'm thinking, I'm like, in the back of my mind is that former molecular biologist. I'm like, yeah, the lion doesn't live in the jungle, the tiger does. But I understand what you're saying here, and that is, if you're that capable, you can be humble. So we had the opportunity to go do all these things, to exercise all those passions, and I don't know that we enable others to do that. Right? We tell them what they should know, tell them what they should do. There's not a lot of choice involved in that. And again, inside of SEAL Team 6, we had a lot of choice to pursue those things. And I don't necessarily know that you need everybody needs to be a warrior scholar. That's the diversity piece again. You need people who are cold hard technicians. I can sit here and talk about Thoreau and all that good stuff. I cannot, for the life of me, put a power tool in my hands or fix anything mechanical. It's just not going to work. I'm not your man. So we need all these different kinds of people coming together. But again, that gets back to giving people the opportunity, good word, to pursue some of their passions. And I don't know that we do that as well as we could.
Right.
Even kids, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
One thing, one thing we talk about a lot is law enforcement, and today, and we know that law enforcement is just chock full of really good people. And you mentioned something in your writings that sometimes even really good people can be biased. Talk about that a second. And you had a personal experience with that.
Well, yeah, all of us are biased. I think the really good people might be aware of their biases, right? Yeah, the most common bias out there is a confirmation bias, right? If you believe the earth is flat, you can go find information that supports your belief. Again, as an operational SEAL, we didn't necessarily have this saying. I use it now. It's kind of the height of resilient thinking. That is this notion that feelings aren't facts. Of course, those feelings come through often through a whole plethora of biases. But yeah, the most. I don't want to get away from the superlative there, but those people that are perhaps self-aware, right, are those people that are also aware of the biases that they harbor, and they can pull back from those things. Bin Laden raid is a classic example. For the first 10 years of Afghanistan, I called this tall man white robe syndrome. Whenever we saw a guy who was tall with white robes on, they would drop a bomb. It must be Bin Laden. You're confirming a bias. Tall guy, white robes, must be Bin Laden. Of course, it wasn't Bin Laden. We killed scores of innocent people doing stuff like that. So when I was read in again to the final Bin Laden raid, I was skeptical. I went up to one of the young women who was on the team of analysts that actually found Bin Laden, and I said, "Okay, here we go again. What have you done to disconfirm that this is Bin Laden?" And I thought I would stump her. Right, here's the old wise SEAL is going to stump the young intelligence analyst, and she comes out with a laundry list of things that they had done to disconfirm. And that was the first time I'd seen somebody, a team, aware of their biases, then try and get around that by actively setting out to disconfirm that this was Bin Laden, and they were unable to do
Wow.
so. So that's a great story of bias. But gosh, there's 150 studied biases these days. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky are probably still two favorites of mine. But there's others out there, the Ariely's of the world, Jonathan Haidt, all these people that introduce us to our biases, and these are things that. They're push buttons. We don't have to think about something. You hear a noise at night. Well, we've evolved to think that noise is something dangerous, right? If it's when we were cavemen, you heard that noise at night. You thought it was a saber-toothed tiger, and you took precautions, right? If it turns out it was a fuzzy bunny, well, no harm, no foul, right? But if it turns out that you assume it's a fuzzy bunny, but then it's a saber-toothed tiger, that's a bias, right? You're a goner. Well, those people have not. Those people that assumed it was a fuzzy bunny and it turned out to be a saber-toothed tiger, They're not here. They didn't pass their genes on to us. We are people who inherited a negativity bias. So we are very sensitive to negative information. Served us well back then, doesn't serve us so well today, right? Negative information spreads quickly, much faster than the truth. There's that old saying, right? A lie is halfway around the world before the truth ever gets in the door. So, those are examples of where biases do not serve us well. Misinformation, disinformation, prey off of a bias like that, and it holds us back, So again, you get a group of people who can be safe together. Well, then they can start to explore some of those biases together, some of those assumptions together, some of their beliefs together, and they can poke holes in them. And what that allows them to do is evolve or adapt or improve, all those things, So yeah, bias is powerful.
So, Dave, in listening to this last exchange, I can't help but think of, and I know it's one of your favorite books, Thinking Fast and Slow.
Yeah.
What else do you recommend that people should be reading? And I know, to your point earlier, you can't force people, but you could certainly give them opportunities. What else should they be reading? What are you reading?
These days I am stuck in the complex systems world, and I read everything complex systems. I would have said, 10 years ago, I was primarily a fiction guy, and anything Hemingway, I would read, anything Faulkner, some John Le Carre. You got to throw that in there for entertainment, right? Some spy novels and stuff like that. As I tell my kids, though, I don't care what you read, just read. Just read, expand your horizons, and whatever makes you a little bit uncomfortable, go read that. Certainly 400 pages of Daniel Kahneman there, Thinking Fast and Slow, is going to make you a little bit uncomfortable, taking a page at a time, stuff like that. Those things that Jonathan Haidt does the same thing. Some of these authors or writers or scientists who've taken to the pen will challenge your assumptions and will make you uncomfortable. That's the stuff you should be reading, whatever that is. If you want to read a decent book as kind of an intro on complex system science, teacher of mine, there's Melanie Mitchell, great book out there. It's she talks about complexity. She makes it approachable, I guess. It's not something that's going to bedazzle you with all the physics and stuff like that. And you get to learn about, hey, your family is a complex system. Well, how can I set the conditions so that my family can improve? So that's a good book on complex systems that won't crush your soul.
Yeah.
Thoreau, go read it. Particularly for young men and women, I think you should read Thoreau and get a little touch of that, adventurism in you.
Wow. Hey, Pete, you have to ask I call it your question.
Yep, I was just thinking about that, right?
Oh, it would fit here really well.
So, in Machiavelli's The Prince, he posed the question, is it better to be loved or feared?
So it's a good, yeah.
I know what Machiavelli said. What would you say?
Well, a couple things here. You can take the complex systems approach and say it's a both and, right? You don't have to be one or the other, but you could also take the Zen approach and knock Machiavelli out and not answer the question. I would, obviously for me is I have no need to be feared. It just doesn't appeal to me. Hell, my damn dogs aren't even afraid of me. So, that's my own particular bias right there. It is much better to be loved than feared. Does that mean that people aren't going to take advantage of you? They certainly are. And instead of being surprised by that, we've come almost full circle here. Prepare to be surprised. That's just how it's going to go. So yeah, I think, again, rigid hierarchies, military in particular, or Western militaries, tend to thrive off of that fear that formal power and formal authority brings with it. And we can look at the scoreboard that doesn't work well. From Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, Yemen, I can keep on going here. That kind of mindset just doesn't work well for you. Not at all. And Sun Tzu said a similar thing, right? He lines up the concubines. How you got to turn these people into an army? How would you turn these concubines into an army? He was presented with that question. He lines them up, and two of the concubines giggle, and he chops their heads off, instilling fear in the rest of them. And man, they line up. Lining up is great like that. Sometimes, if we all want to line up and get the vaccine or get a wear masks, in that regard, but that kind of fear mongering doesn't work well. It doesn't. It might work, but that doesn't necessarily mean we should do it. There are better ways to do that, I think, and to free us up. The fear keeps us from reaching that potential. I'm just not a fan of it.
So I think that was one of the best answers we've gotten so far. What episode is this? 14 or something? But no, you were pretty right on. And Machiavelli said that you have to be both.
Yeah.
But your answer, I think, was better. I don't know if you guys heard it a minute ago before I went on.
Oh, we did. But
my house was on fire, so it's the fire. The fire's out now.
Well, I was just laughing that you're going to miss dinner then. So okay, yeah.
I think dinner just went up in smoke.
So, Dave, I have one final question.
Lay it on me.
And we sort of started. Well, when we heard your story, you started off in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
You worked your way up there as a busboy. You made your way. Well, first you were going to go into the medical field, but then you decided, hey, I want to be a little bit more adventurous, and you went into the Navy went into the Navy for 25 years, and of course now you're running your own business, and just listening to you, it's just exceptional what you're doing. But if there's one thing you wish you would have known back prior to being a busboy, with all the experiences you've had today, what would that have been? That could have changed would it have changed your life in a different arc? Would you have looked for some insight like that?
One thing that I wish I had known. I can think of a lot of things I wish I'd have known in hindsight, right? But the one thing that stands out the most, I would say, for us, I see this in organizations all the time, and that is that it's okay to fail and it's okay to talk about it. Makes us so uncomfortable. Yet there's so much you can glean from that, and so many places you can go from that ability to embrace that kind of discomfort. You walk through that doorway. I mean, we talk about one side of the doorway, it's all bright and sunny, right? There's pink elephants and purple unicorns and all that stuff, and everything is known and everything is certain and everything is comfortable. On the other side of that doorway, it's everything is unknown, it's uncomfortable, it's uncertain, it's a little bit gloomy. But that's the place you gotta go. And I wish I had known that, just that I wish if you could program humans, that's the one program that they understand coming right out of the womb. Hey, it's okay to go into that space that's a little bit uncomfortable, because there's a lot you can learn there. And there's all kinds of different things that puts you on just an entirely different trajectory in terms of where you're going to go in this world,
And
that's thank you for that.
Yeah.
And the truth is, everyone was in that space or will be in that space someday. So they can really relate to that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, man.
Hey, David, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciated the conversation. To be honest, I could talk with you all night, if not all week. So thank you for spending an hour with us.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for having me. Truly. That was fun.
Okay. Well, you have a good night. I'm going to say goodbye to Pete so he can go grab his burnt dinner.
I've got to put the fire out.
All right. Thank you, sir. You be safe.
Cheers, man.
We'll talk again soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye, Dave. That he was outstanding. And if you notice that there's with a lot of our people that we've brought on, there's a lot of repetition here, in a good way. It's more of a confirmation or a reinforcement rather than repetition. Is probably has a negative connotation. It's reinforcement and confirmation of certain principles. Like this last discussion we had on, it's okay to say I messed this up. I was wrong. I failed. And we learn from that. And I think other people appreciate that because they see themselves as having been there, or if not, they will see themselves as having been there. None of us escape that.
You're not kidding. I think it also confirms we have some really good guests coming on the show, Pete.
We do. We have great people, and this was a outstanding.
Look, I usually, I hate the burden of going back over and processing this audio, but I can tell you I'm looking forward again to listening to him speak. So, and I don't often say that because it's a burdensome task, but looking forward to it.
You're going to leave my fire alarm in there?
No, I might keep it in.
I showed. How long was it on? I tried to hit the.
It was about 3 minutes.
No way! I hit the mute button immediately.
It was very, very quick, but I was laughing because I think I just caught your wife saying something too, and you hit it.
She was saying sorry.
I think she wants to be on the show. Last show, she said something too.
I think so, but no, we'll regret it. Trust me.
I better edit that out. You'll be in trouble. Yeah,
I guess.
Hey, Pete. Well, you know what? Before we go, I just want to remind our listeners and our viewers, depending on how you're picking us up, whether it's through YouTube or whether it's on any of the podcast streaming services, is please check out our website, www.rffactor.com. Pete and I are spending a lot of time putting a lot of content on there for you to enjoy. So please check that out and please register for it as well. And we also have a Substack that we're running as well. And one